The Allen Lund Company continues to support the owner-operators of OOIDA. Thank you for what you do, and stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Today, April 30th, 2025, is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the final chapter in the Vietnam War. We're going to mark that anniversary by bringing back a story we first broadcast in 2020, the story of a Navy vessel that played a key role that day. It's the story of the USS Kirk, as told through the eyes of a trucker who served as a gunner on the ship, a trucker who was in Saigon at the end, and the ship's official historian who was also on board that day. Also on today's show, the freight market remains in a state of limbo, but being the optimist that he is, Brent Hutto of Truckstop says there's evidence that market conditions are getting a bit stronger. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today: the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance is working quickly to shore up enforcement of the English proficiency regulations. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association got this ball rolling with a petition asking CVSA to make a lack of English language proficiency an out-of-service violation, as it once was. On Tuesday, CVSA's Driver and Traffic Committee took up the issue and made not one but three moves. The first is to place a driver out of service who cannot react and speak the English language sufficiently to communicate with a safety officer while responding to official inquiries. The committee also recommended petitioning the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to change a rule to specifically state that a lack of English proficiency is an out-of-service violation. And the committee also recommended that FMCSA require uniformity in CDL testing when it comes to English, considering states are currently permitted to give the knowledge or written portion of CDL exams in languages other than English. The Alliance's executive committee is expected to take up the recommendation in the coming days. In addition to responding to OOIDA's petition, the action at CVSA comes on the heels of an executive order signed by President Trump that calls for enforcement of the English proficiency regulations, along with review of non-domiciled CDLs issued by state agencies. As Congress works toward a long-term solution to make the Highway Trust Fund sustainable, Representative Mike Collins of Georgia is making a plea on behalf of truck drivers.
Truckers have paid enough into the tax system.
Representative Collins' remarks came during a House Highways and Transit Subcommittee hearing on Tuesday. The congressman, who owns a trucking company, relayed some of the taxes that truckers have to pay.
I mean, first of all, we pay for IRP tags, which is supposed to be the International Registration Plan, for every truck, every tag, every year. Then we've got FET tax on new purchases, which is based on the purchase price, which when I bought my first truck back in the early 90s, fully loaded, decked out, was $81,000. Today's pushing over $200,000 per truck. Trailers are the same way. We pay FET tax on every tire we buy. And by the way, there's 18 tires on an 18-wheeler. And we use a lot of them. We pay fuel tax based on fuel mileage in every state across this country, no matter whether you buy fuel in that state, and the tax is based on the tax rates for that state. We also pay the federal highway use tax, which has gone up over years. We used to pay it in arrears based on how many trucks you did have for the past year. Now we pay it up front on how many trucks you have today in one lump sum, and there is no refund if you wreck or if you sell the truck, period. So that's just a conglomeration of what we pay to stay out there on the road.
The remarks from Representative Collins came as Congress tries to find fixes for the Highway Trust Fund, which is the main funding source for highways and bridge projects. Its revenue comes from fuel taxes, which are projected to decrease over the coming years due to electric vehicles. And Congressman David Rouser of North Carolina said that's a problem.
Obviously, gas tax revenue will continue to decline as cars become more fuel efficient. Electric vehicles require no fuel and therefore obviously are not paying into the Highway Trust Fund. CBO estimates gas tax revenues, the majority of the trust fund receipts, will decline by nearly 40% over the next decade. Fortunately, this committee is intent on addressing this shortfall in a fair and equitable manner. Through reconciliation, this committee will propose a $200 annual registration fee on electric vehicles at the federal level, which will raise tens of billions of dollars in additional revenue for the Highway Trust Fund over the next decade to better ensure that all users of our roads are paying to maintain those roads.
While a step in the right direction, lawmakers during the hearing acknowledged much more must be done to solve the Highway Trust Fund's estimated shortfall of $142 billion. Diesel prices were down for a third straight week last week. The Energy Information Administration reports that the national average dropped 2 cents to settle in at $3.51 a gallon. Prices were down in every region on the EIA survey, led by a nearly 3-cent dip on the East Coast. Some concerning economic indicators have begun to pop up. The Department of Commerce reported Wednesday that the U.S. economy shrank 0.3% in the first quarter of this year, the first decline in 3 years. The dip was driven by a wider trade deficit spurred by purchases ahead of President Trump's tariffs and cutbacks in government spending. Economists widely expect tariffs to push inflation higher in the months to come and depress economic growth. If that holds true, the freight market could be looking at a downturn. The OIDA Foundation's latest market update says a number of worrying signs have started to emerge. The total spot market cycle indicator, a measure of the total spot rate and 3-year moving average, shows unusual amounts of contraction for this time of year, the foundation said, adding that the only reasonable explanation for this is tariffs and, more particularly, the uncertainty surrounding trade. The report indicates that volume and demand are weakening, capacity is loosening, and rates as well as operating costs are falling. Overall, the foundation clocks the future outlook as negative. Other signs are also emerging. Mack Trucks recently announced hundreds of layoffs, citing tariffs and economic uncertainty. And during an earnings call last week, Adam Miller, CEO of Knight-Swift, said several internal and external indicators were pointing to positive momentum in the truckload market early in the first quarter. But Miller then said the talk of tariffs and a fluid trade policy spurred a more cautious tone among shippers.
The increased uncertainty among shippers and growing concern among consumers resulted in lower volumes and an absence of the typical seasonal build in March. This has also impacted current rate negotiations in the truckload bid season. We are still achieving increases in the low to mid-single-digit percentage range. However, we are not seeing the increases build like we had originally anticipated the bid environment would play out.
And TFI International last week told the Bowen Island Undercurrent that they plan to walk away from all expansion and acquisition deals this year due to concerns over tariffs. In reaction to the Commerce Department numbers released Wednesday, President Trump responded. In a post on social media, he called for patience, said the data is a spillover from the Biden administration, and added that the negative numbers have nothing to do with tariffs. International is recalling nearly 15,000 trucks over a problem with the windshield wipers. Certain 2025 and 2026 model year HV, HX, LT, MV, and RH vehicles are impacted. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says a linkage that connects the right side wiper arm to the motor may separate, causing the wipers to fail. Dealers will replace the wiper module free of charge. And finally, Travel Centers of America is offering up free inspections ahead of CVSA's International Road Check event. The free mid-trip inspections available through May 12th are available at participating TA truck service locations. International Road Check starts 1 day later on May 13th and runs for 3 days. The focus of this year's enforcement blitz will be on driver record of duty status and vehicle tires. That's Lane Line Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. If you ask most truckers what they think of speed limiters, you won't hear any positive reviews. Now, a bill in Congress would prevent FMCSA from making any further attempt to require the devices. That's the DRIVE Act, H.R. 2819. Call your member of the U.S. House today at 202-224-3121 or write a letter using the website fightingfortruckers.com. Next, we'll have an encore of our 2002 story about two truckers' experiences the day Saigon fell and the Vietnam War finally ended. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when you're truck on a cat scale. Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Landline Now, welcome back. In our lifetimes, we will all witness important turning points in history. Some are positive, like the moon landing or the fall of the Berlin Wall. Others are sad or tragic. Now, a former Navy crew involved in one of those moments wants to make history again. Landline Now host Mark Reddick has a report.
It was late April of 1975. Radio stations across the country were playing Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John.
So the stage is being set.
George Foreman fought for the first time after losing the heavyweight title to Muhammad Ali. And the Symbionese Liberation Army took kidnapped victim Patty Hearst with them to a bank robbery, with the security camera footage exploding onto TV screens nationwide. At Tulane University in New Orleans, President Gerald Ford said this:
"Today, America can regain the sense of pride that existed before Vietnam. But it cannot be achieved by refighting a war that is finished as far as America is concerned."
However, the president was wrong. America had one last role to play. 7 days later, more than 9,000 miles and an ocean away, the long and terrible story of the Vietnam War truly reached its end. Saigon, South Vietnam's capital, was in its death throes as the North Vietnamese army slowly clawed its way into the final scrap of land under Southern control. As the sound of explosions and small arms fire burst through a thick soup of heat and humidity, those events brought 20 years of American involvement in the South to an end. And that triggered a long-planned effort by the U.S. military. Signaled by an April 29th radio broadcast of Bing Crosby's classic song, White Christmas, Operation Frequent Wind began. Planes, any kind of ship available, and helicopters loaded past capacity with refugees and U.S. Embassy staff began the rush to evacuate the slowly falling capital. As the choppers and ships made their way out into the South China Sea, a destroyer, the USS Kirk, waited ready to help. On board the Kirk that day was Bill Cutler, 65, of Mooresville, North Carolina, a longtime trucker and an OOIDA life member who served as a gunner. As events picked up steam on April 30th, Cutler witnessed one of the most enduring symbols of those sad events.
Every time a helicopter landed on the flight deck, we disembarked the personnel off, disarmed them, and threw the helo over the side. Each helicopter was loaded with 8 to 10, maybe 12 refugees coming straight from Saigon. So you multiply that times 13, and then one CH-47 Chinook loaded with people also.
The Kirk was to have a significant role in the events of that day, leaving Bill Cutler and others as witnesses to history. However, the pace of events ramped up, and the die was cast for the last free parts of South Vietnam much earlier. OOIDA senior member John Osborne was serving as a Navy medic at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, charged with the care of non-military staff. Osborne had already served 2 tours, one as a medic with a Marine Combat Battalion, the second with the Brown Water Navy, the patrol boats and swift boats on the nation's rivers. However, working in an embassy was a long-time goal, so he accepted the Saigon posting. He mainly treated minor wounds and problems. Anyone truly sick, he says, was shipped out. If he thought the embassy duty was going to be a walk in the park, he was disappointed, and he remembers those events well.
It started out probably 3.5 days prior, hit and miss, and it just got more intense. And then when we realized that most of our embassy personnel and other embassies had bailed, and we had a lot of ships off the coast. I mean, a lot. I mean, we had stuff from frigates to multiple carriers. Probably the largest concentration I'd ever heard of U.S. ships out there.
Among those ships was the USS Kirk. Along with Cutler, on board that day was Hugh Doyle, now the historian for the USS Kirk Association. Doyle remembers well how the evacuation of April 29th and 30th started.
When the evacuation started, it was a helicopter evacuation. When it started, the Marine Corps helicopters that were cycling back and forth from sea into Saigon to pick up the official evacuees and bring them out, they were planning on taking out somewhere in the vicinity of, I guess, about 7,000 people that they were planning on. But what they weren't planning on was all the other helicopters that started swarming out.
The main evacuation on the final day was by U.S. military helicopters, the big Chinooks, designed to carry up to 50 people. They were taking off from every U.S. facility near Saigon, including the American Embassy. John Osborne said as the hours passed, the pace became more and more frantic at the U.S. compound. More Americans and staff left, and the people outside the embassy enclosure became more hostile. Meanwhile, those at the embassy could hear explosions in the distance as the North Vietnamese army inched closer and closer, although many of the blasts were Americans and South Vietnamese forces blowing up equipment, vehicles, and munitions to prevent them from falling into the North's hands. While that was underway, another unplanned evacuation was taking shape. Led by South Vietnamese, mainly officers in their Air Force, it involved smaller helicopters taking off from locations throughout those areas not yet controlled by the North Vietnamese army.
Every guy that could get his hands on a helicopter, and there were stories of those helicopters landing in neighborhoods and picking up everybody in that neighborhood that wanted to leave. They hadn't planned it that way. It was just, he went to get his wife and his kids and said, "I got room, come on." And people just grabbed what they could and went because they had been told the stories of being retrained by the communists when the communists got there, and it just scared the Jesus out of people.
Hugh Doyle remembers those smaller choppers as well.
These were Vietnamese helicopters that we had given to the Vietnamese Army and the Air Force over the years. All of a sudden, these little Huey helicopters, the single-rotor helicopters, just started to swarm out.
As the last of the U.S. military Chinooks headed out to sea to rendezvous with waiting Navy vessels, the smaller choppers followed them. John Osborne saw an apocalyptic, chaotic scene unfold.
The sky was full of the smaller, Hueys and Bells and even some Hughes helicopters, which basically had, 5, 6, 7 people, and they were crammed full of people. I actually saw a couple helicopters that people were holding on to. They shouldn't even been there. For their dear life, they were holding on. I hope they made it. But we were over water, and they were still holding on. Don't know how they did it, but, and listening to, as we, deplaned, that's what the term for leaving the helicopter, it was just amazing. I've been hurt a time or two in the military, and I've been hurt in other things, but scared, thinking I wasn't going to make it home, and I volunteered for that duty.
Hugh Doyle said the motivation of the escaping Vietnamese was obvious, and everyone knew what was coming.
They knew that the end was there, so they just took a chance. They jumped in any helicopter they could find. Most of these helicopters were piloted by young Vietnamese Air Force and Army pilots, and they had their families aboard, their wives and children and their mothers and fathers, and they were just looking for some place to land. And they found us, as well as many other ships. We were just one of many small ships that were part of this evacuation, and it was an impromptu thing. It was not part of the planned evacuation.
John Osborne was on the second to the last U.S. military helicopter to leave South Vietnam. He says the well-known photos of smaller choppers on the embassy roof were not in fact the official U.S. military aircraft that were evacuating American staff. Those landed and took off from a parking lot where John boarded the chopper that evacuated him and others out to sea. Back at the embassy, a single Marine platoon remained behind to provide cover. It was assumed that they evacuated with everyone else, and it was hours before their rescue. Meanwhile, John's helicopters sped to the large U.S. fleet offshore. As he watched the surrounding skies, it became increasingly obvious that things were not going according to plan.
We're there, and we're going, and we're hearing this aircraft carrier is available. This one's now not available. I mean, and at the same time, you're hearing smaller helicopters are landing on ships that aren't designed to have more than one helicopter. So these guys are taking South Vietnamese military helicopters and having to toss them over the side so that they can get the next helicopter that may be running out of fuel before, as it lands. And that was, chronic. You'd hear, Mayday, Mayday, I'm out of fuel, on and on, all kinds of stuff on the radio. And they pretty much piped it through so we could hear it. And we were kind of wired.
Long after the final U.S. chopper left Saigon, the smaller helicopters continued to take off for the fleet. John says the last small chopper evacuating people from the embassy roof took place long after the last Americans left. From the deck of the Kirk, which was closer to shore than most of the other U.S. ships, Bill Cutler, Hugh Doyle, and their fellow crewmen watched the situation unfold.
We were watching these little helicopters fly over us, heading out much further out to sea. We were one of the closest in ships to the shore. The larger aircraft carriers and large amphibious ships were further out to sea, maybe 10 or 12 miles beyond where we were. These Vietnamese helicopters, the little Vietnamese Hueys, and a couple Chinooks too, were flying over top of us, just searching for the large decks to land on. We had a flight deck, but it was only a flight deck that was able to take one helicopter at a time. They were just swarming out. The Marine Corps and the Air Force helicopters that were part of the official evacuation, all these Vietnamese helicopters started following them. And they were just looking for some place to land. They had their families aboard. It was completely impromptu.
The captain and crew of the Kirk recognized that help was needed, and fast. So as with nearly all U.S. personnel that day, they rapidly took action.
We had a man on board. It was a first-class petty officer who spoke some rudimentary Vietnamese. So we brought him up into our combat information center, and we started broadcasting that we had an open deck. And we just broadcasted the number of our ship, 1087. We just said, land here, and he just kept repeating it in kind of pidgin Vietnamese, land here, land here. And finally, one of the Vietnamese pilots got the hint. He saw us, he heard him, and he came in and landed. And it was quite a thing. We had a young man stand down there. His name was McClellan. He was a young airman, and his job was to land helicopters. That was his job was to land our helicopter. The reason we had a flight deck is we had a helicopter of our own. So the first Vietnamese helicopter came in and successfully landed on board the ship. As soon as he landed, other helicopters saw that he was landing on our ship, so they all lined up. And we had about 4 or 5 helicopters all waiting to land on our flight deck. Problem was, it was a single flight deck, and could only take one helicopter at a time. So the next thing we did was the captain made a decision to take that helicopter once the people were safely off it, and just throw it over the side, which then cleared the deck for the next one to land.
At one point, one of those helicopter pilots, after offloading his passengers, miscalculated. His chopper went over the side prematurely with him inside it. Bill Cutler kicked off his shoes and dove into the water after the still-running chopper, saving the pilot's life. However, as the Kirk became ever more crowded, the too many helicopters problem was quickly replaced by a far more serious one, and the crew of the Kirk once again proved they were up to the task.
Mark will have more on this story coming up after a short break.
At Truckstop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truckstop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long-haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. 44 years ago, the USS Kirk played a vital role as Saigon fell and the Vietnam War ended. Before the break, Mark Rettig was relaying the story of the massive helicopter evacuation. We continue now with that story.
The wave of helicopters flooding out of South Vietnam on April 30th, 1975, quickly created an entirely new problem for the crew of the USS Kirk: refugees. The destroyer was never designed to handle any significant number of civilians. Plus, the Vietnamese refugees left their homes with little to nothing, and what they did bring often went overboard with the helicopter after landing. OOIDA member Bill Cutler says that as the Kirk quickly filled, the crew made every effort to provide the care those refugees needed.
We became overcrowded very quickly. We had to put up tarps for the people sitting outside. It was extremely hot, so we had to get them in the shade and get their food ready and all that stuff, and make sure that they were comfortable and well cared for.
Meanwhile, the chopper carrying OOIDA senior member John Osborne finally landed, putting him on board one of the aircraft carriers further out. From that vantage, he watched as more and more helicopters arrived all the way into the night.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and literally to the point that they lit these ships up with every light possible, not to blind them, but to get them there. And then the Navy medevac, the rescues, air sea rescue and helicopters, man, they were out coming back, getting fuel and going back out because there were aircraft not making it. There were aircraft having mechanical problems, but aircraft running out of fuel, aircraft overloaded. Basically, it was one or two guys flying with Mr. Rogers' neighborhood in the back. That's the best way I can say it. I mean, from newborns to grandma, stuffed in that helicopter. And I mean, maybe they were supposed to take 12 and they may have had 25. They were literally maxed out and they threw those aircraft away. I mean, when they landed, they got out of them and that crew on that ship over the side and the next one would land. And it was boom, boom. And did they get to bring their stuff? No. There's a lot of stuff. When they got out of the helicopter, you weren't allowed to go back and grab that bag you'd left over in the corner of the helicopter. It went over the side. What you had was your family and you had your life, and it was time to go someplace that you'd never been before and start all over again. And they were scared, very scared.
In fact, John said in many cases, it went far beyond scared.
Because there was some incidences where we heard some gunshots, and it was somebody realizing that their whole world had just died. And he had just flown a helicopter out, got his family there, and then he didn't want to live. And that was really sad.
Meanwhile, the USS Kirk, which had taken on the occupants of more than a dozen of the smaller helicopters, 200-plus refugees, rendezvoused with another ship more capable of caring for them. Even though their part in the helicopter evacuation was finished, many of those aboard the U.S. Navy vessels quickly realized they had more work ahead of them. Kirk Association historian Hugh Doyle said that was especially true for the crew of the USS Kirk.
We were directed to head south overnight by ourselves, and we went down to Con Son Island, which was a small island off the coast, the southeast coast of Vietnam. And what we didn't realize at the time is that the Vietnamese Navy, the remnants of the Vietnamese Navy, there were dozens and dozens of ships directed the previous couple of days to go down to Con Son Island and rendezvous there. And our job was to gather remaining Vietnamese ships, Vietnamese Navy ships, and take them away from Vietnam to the Philippines. When we arrived there, we found that there was probably upwards of 50 ships. And when I say ships, some were destroyer size and very small ships. Some of them were really too small to even make it across the South China Sea. So what we did is we took a number of hours, and we ended up with a total of 32 ships that were considered seaworthy. And the ships that were not going to go, that were going to remain behind, they took all their refugees and put them onto the ones that were going to go. So what we ended up with was about 32. I think the number was 32 ships. And on those ships were 33,000 refugees. We then got this entire force underway to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and it was about a 1,000-mile transit across the South China Sea. And we had 6 American ships with us and 32 Vietnamese ships with all those refugees. And it took us about 7 days to finally get to the Philippines.
On the decks of those ships, refugees were packed like sardines, shoulder to shoulder. Some of the larger ships had 7,000 to 8,000 refugees aboard. Worries about disease spreading and the ability of the fleet to feed the mass of South Vietnamese refugees weighed heavy on the Kirk's captain and other commanders. John Osborne says the U.S. naval personnel taking in refugees did an incredible job, working long hours and doing anything needed to keep the situation under control. None, he said, seemed frightened, shaken, or affected, from the top officers down to the medical personnel.
No, they were like, this is my job. I've got to do this. Above and beyond professionalism, care. I mean, whether you were a corpsman, whether you were just a basic first aider, they were checking people out and passing people on. I mean, the triage started the moment you came out the side hatch of that helicopter. Somebody was checking you or grandma or that baby or whatever out, and they're looking for real sickness right away or real injuries right away or mental health. I mean, that was the other cool thing. Every chaplain that I saw was rocking and rolling. And when they could find a Buddhist priest that was in the group, that poor guy did not get a break because he was right there as the translator for his South Vietnamese people, trying to make sure that their head was on right. You know, I can say that everybody I met gave 110%. Nobody, not a single person, whined, bitched, nothing. I mean, it was, can you get back up there and help them? Can you do this? No problem.
Hugh Doyle says it was the same on board the Kirk, which is even more amazing when you consider much of the crew's relative lack of experience.
We had 275 men aboard. It was only men then. There were no females aboard the ship. But our average age was probably about 21 years old, which means all the old folks, like I was 30, the captain was 38 years old. The oldest chief petty officer we had on the ship, I think, was 42, and he was the ancient mariner. You know, so at age 42. So what that meant, you know, if you do the math on that, we had a whole lot of 18 and 19-year-old boys, really. And in fact, we had 3 17-year-old kids. They called them kiddie cruisers. They were aboard with their parents' permission. They had to, in order to enlist in the Navy under 18 years old, you had to get your mom or dad to actually sign a permission slip. So we had 3 of them aboard. But all of a sudden, we weren't planning to shoot anybody. We weren't planning to do anything other than to change diapers and feed babies and do all that. And these young men were just actually magnificent. They really were. Anything that was needed to be done, these guys were standing in line, volunteering to do. You know, rough, tough sailors, all of a sudden they're big brothers and uncles and to all these refugees. It was great.
At the Philippines, its mission accomplished, the Kirk sailed on to other duties. The refugees, for the most part, were resettled in the United States, and history moved forward as it always does. "44 years later, the story of the USS Kirk is still not over. OOIDA life member Bill Cutler, the former Kirk crew member, says the ship remained in the U.S. Navy until the early 1990s. That's when it became part of another nation's naval forces.
The beat goes on.
She is currently flying under the Taiwanese flag in the Taiwan Navy. And after we came back from Vietnam, which was 1976, we had received orders that she was going to be re-home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. I got orders off the ship at that time, myself and the other plank owners, to go elsewhere in the Navy. And she was sent over to Yokosuka, Japan until, I believe she was decommissioned in 1989 in Yokosuka, and put under a Lend-Lease program to the Taiwanese Navy. After the Lend-Lease program, they actually purchased the ship, so it's in their care entirely.
However, the crew members of the Kirk are extremely dedicated to the ship and its memory, and they aren't content to let the story of the USS Kirk end there. Bill Cutler and Hugh Doyle have been part of an effort to bring the Kirk back to the United States, make it into a museum, and help educate people on an important event in our recent history. They set their goal and have started their effort, even getting the USS Kirk Association registered as a nonprofit so they could take donations. Cutler says they've contacted the Taiwanese Navy, letting them know of the association's interest in the ship, and they've started the effort to get the funds necessary.
We are going to be doing a fundraising program to raise enough funds to reclaim the Kirk back to San Diego, her home port, where she originally belongs, to convert her to a floating museum and training center, an educational facility, to teach people what it was like to be in Vietnam and do the things we did over there for the refugees. It's taken us this long just to get the 501c3 organized and approved. So we now have the green light, and we are starting to move forward to accomplish this mission. And it's going to be a Mount Everest-sized mission to get this done. So the fundraiser is just going to be a small portion of it. We're going to need a lot of media coverage. We're going to need a lot of other people getting on board, that influential people like senators and congressmen and whatnot. Our main goal is to get the ship back to San Diego so that our captain, Lord willing, he's still with us, and he is today, can stand on the bridge and sit in his chair one more time.
Bill Cutler said that the crew of the Kirk from that era remained dedicated to their captain, Paul H. Jacobs, and executive officer Richard McKenna, calling them, quote, two of the finest officers the Navy's ever produced. They remember how the two men led the crew in the rescue and in the task that followed, feeding all the refugees while still running a Navy vessel in potentially hostile waters. At one point, Cutler said they took on several tons of rice and accomplished it in 15 minutes flat. It's that commitment that Bill told us the crew members still have, thanks to that leadership.
It was an honor to serve under Captain Paul Jacobs and Commander McKenna. They trained us very well for the task at hand. They taught us not to give up, always move forward, and never quit until the job is done.
However, as far as the restoration of the Kirk, Bill Cutler will not see the job done. On January 2nd, along US 59 near Hungerford, Texas, Bill Cutler, who survived Vietnam, Navy service, and 30 years behind the wheel of a truck, died as the result of a crash with another truck, which was going the wrong way on a one-way highway. He was 65 years old. For Landline Now, I'm Mark Rettig. You've been listening to an encore of our story about the USS Kirk from 2020. We're presenting that today in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the ultimate end of the Vietnam War on April 30th, 1975. You can learn more about the USS Kirk Association, the ship, and the effort to save it through the website kirk1087.org. And we will have links to that on our website, landlinenow.com. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Protect your diesel engine with Howe's Diesel Defender. Restore vital lubricity, eliminate injector deposits, and boost fuel economy by 5% or more. Power, performance, protection, all in one. Howe's Diesel Defender, available now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you're hauling freight and running your own business, you need to keep track of some basic facts and figures that can determine whether you succeed or fail. And that includes finding the freight and how much money you can make hauling it. Today, Landline Now's Scott Thompson will bring us some of that information and get some insight as to why things are happening with the folks from Truckstop.com. Here's Scott now with a report.
Thanks, Mark. If we're talking market conditions, we're talking with Brent Hutto of Truckstop, who joins us on the line now. Brent, how's it going?
Man, I tell you what, Scott, it's going super well. I'm in one of my favorite cities in America. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I love it just because it's such Americana, man. It's a trucker city. It's a trucker-friendly state, and I just love being here. I'm at the Broker Carrier Summit, which is a unique event that just kind of started a few years ago. We're in the middle of kind of the pandemic on kind of getting smaller carriers and smaller brokers to kind of get together to kind of work relationally so they can move freight better. So lots of fun, and but it has a very unique feel to it. But having a good time, man.
Yeah, go Pacers as well, right?
Right, yeah, they're putting it on them.
They're doing well. For the newcomers out there, every week you kind of pick a song as a theme for the market conditions out there, and we just heard today's A Little Bit Stronger, courtesy of Sarah Evans. I'm going to take that as a positive sign?
Yeah, I think certainly. First off, met Sarah Evans back when she first launched her career. Believe it or not, I had an uncle that was in the music business that was actually her Western promotions manager for her on the album she was on. I think she was on the Atlantic.
You're dropping names now, Brent. You're a name dropper.
Well, but that just means I've been around a long time. But no, I've just always appreciated her. Just the quality, which is, and her song "A Little Bit Stronger" is obviously about a breakup. But this is I like theme songs, so it's a little bit stronger, which means the market continues to get a little bit stronger, even when it looks like things are getting a little more difficult. And this week, it's kind of the reason I chose this as a song was that the market demand index, so the pressure in the market, went down last week after it was up the week before. It went down 2 weeks ago after it was up 3 weeks ago, and then it kind of came back up last week. So the data that I talk about with you guys on the radio here is always 7 days old, and it's the freshest freight data in the entire universe. So that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it powerful for owner-operators and small fleets that are trying to move freight across the American highways. And so but the pressure came back up. It went from 85 to 91. Now, normal pressure in the market is like about a 55. So if you just think about 55 as the normal, when it's 91, it's more pressure in the market, which means it favors carriers, Scott, which is really good. So that's why I'm like, it's a little bit stronger load postings, which is the first thing you want to look at. You want to look at how much freight is out there, and is it at the mark? Is it at the 5-year average, or is it above? Well, it's been above the 5-year average for quite a while now. And this last week, it was 13.3% above the 5-year average, which is fantastic. So, but it increased almost 2% week to week. But it had been increasing for the last 4 or 5 weeks. It had been increasing. So now part of that was driven by what was going on with the tariffs and some of the pull forward in the freight that was trying to be moved cross-border and different things, and whether it's containers or cross-border or whatever else, just people trying to get freight in the country before some of these tariffs hit. And so everyone thought, well, as soon as the tariffs hit, then everything's just going to stop. Well, it didn't. It just kind of continues to stay pretty strong. So that's super important. That's why I said it continues to get a little bit stronger every week for the owner-operator. And my prediction, and if you look at the people that study this from the very beginning of the year, they said this marketplace is going to continue to gain strength all year long. Now, the tariffs are going to kind of make things go bumping up and down, but the marketplace continues to get stronger. Rates went up 4 cents went down 4 cents, which is kind of unique because they had been going up for multiple weeks in a row. And that's because all three segments went down just a little bit, but they're still doing well as far as the marketplace. Van could be a little higher. It's $1.84 last week, which it could be a little higher. It could be more closer to $2, which would be better for van haulers. But fuel dropped a penny too. So when rates go down and fuel goes down, that means when those two things coincide, it means that it's not necessarily as much the market as it is fuel related when the freight rates drop. But Fuel is only 4 cents above where before Russia invaded Ukraine, which was kind of the big delineation line between when fuel started going up.
Sure.
But also, and the last thing that we look at, Scott, all the time is we want to make sure anybody new to this call, as you said earlier, we always look at the outbound tender reject index. That's a FreightWaves number, a sonar number. That is it at 5% or below, or is it above 5%? So 5% is sort of the watermark on whether or not we're going to get more freight in the spot market. The outbound tender reject index has been above 5% for 29 straight weeks. So that's a lot of weeks. That's a lot of weeks. It's more than 6 months. It's been above 5%, which means that's where everybody looks at this. Okay, we're going to get more freight. We're going to get more freight in the spot market for the owner operator or not. Well, the contract marketplace, which is what the outbound tender reject index reflects, it indicates that we're going to continue to get more freight in the market. When there's more freight in the market, Scott, rates go up, and there's more opportunity for owner operators and small fleets to make money.
Yeah, cautious optimism, I think, remains the
cautious.
the
That's the way
baseline
to put
here.
it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking at the regional numbers here again from Truckstop, and one region in particular, really popping when it comes to load availability and rates. What is going on in the Southeast, where things look to be booming a little bit there, right?
Well, it's booming because it's flatbed. Flatbed has been up for quite a while, continuing to be up. The Southeast is just pregnant. How's that? That's a good word. It's pregnant with flatbed type of freight, whether it be from the steel industry, the manufacturing industry, from the wood industry, from even the food, not the food industry, but from the industries that put freight on flatbeds, whether it be, whether you're moving equipment, whether you're moving, like I said, wood products, steel products, all this sort of manufacturing part. Now, the manufacturing actually goes all the way up through the middle of the United States up into Ohio as well, because you get a lot of those same things in that same belt as you go north on Highway 65. But the Southeast has been strong for a while because of flatbed. Flatbed continues to do that. If you look year over year in rates, it's up 8.5%. It's up the most in any part of the country. So if you're an owner operator and if you got a flatbed, Southeast freight is probably going to pay you more than anywhere else in the country. And so, but there's been good increases in other parts, like the Mountain Central from load availability was up 17% year over year, which is really, really good. But from a rate standpoint, it's about even. It's about the same as it was last year. So, but I'll tell you the thing to do, and this is what I want to encourage any owner operator to do, is just get on the load board and understand the different geographic areas and look in. There's always really good freight in lanes. You just have to continue to look or have the alerts that are on Truckstop that tell you, hey, there's been a new piece of freight put on. This is something you normally look for, and go take a look at it, because there is still good freight. But in the end, it all comes down to the negotiation, Scott, no doubt. So some of the top lanes we've talked about over the recent past has been really out of Texas, but there continues to be every few weeks we see some changes. Like there's in van, Memphis, New Orleans, and Jacksonville were the top three. They increased anywhere from 9% to 11%. Not huge gains, like 20 or 30%, but okay gains in it. When you look at flatbed, you got coming out of Phoenix, Denver, and Chicago. None of those are Texas. Some of them going into Texas, which is interesting, but none of them originating from Texas. And those went up anywhere from 14% to 20%. So this is what I mean by looking in those lanes. Refrigerated, you got Houston, Memphis, and Memphis were the three big gains, 29% to 32%. So there's opportunity. This is why I continue to say you need to know how to use your data. Make sure that you have your fingertips on the data and you really know how to use it, because you get the best return from it.
We are running really short on time here, Brent. Probably only about 30 seconds left, but you've got advice kind of interwoven throughout everything you talk about. But any final words here before we let you go for people to keep an eye on?
Yeah. Last thing is just there's been a big change. The Trump administration is going to sign a document enforcing English being the language of the trucker. I know that sounds funny. Why isn't it always that way? Because they really need to understand our highways. If anybody does, the trucker does. It's just really good to see the current administration pushing things back to it being a level playing field for anybody trying to get this market. And understanding and knowing English is a really big part of the safety on our highways and the efficiency on our roads.
Yeah, certainly one of the bigger topics of 2025 thus far, along with rates, and interesting to see how it's all playing out there. Brent, always interesting to talk to you, and we appreciate your time.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks for what Landline and OIDA does for the trucker.
That was Brent Hutto of Truckstop. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. That's our program for today. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars. Fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.